Greetings, everyone. I'm really excited today to show you my latest creation. This is Surviving the Wildwood. It is a Dungeons & Dragons supplement based on my latest book, The Feral Girl. And it's just a little adventure starring Thelana, but you can also make your own characters. And it deals with surviving the Wildwood, which is a rainforest that is full of monsters that you have to get through. When you're foraging, you're making a survival wisdom check to try to find food and water and resources to survive. Then the second part is hiking. That's you roll to move. One thing I've always really liked is rolling to move. I think that's a mechanic that I implement a lot when I play D&D. And I'm not talking about rolling to move like on a dungeon map. I'm talking about like on an overworld map. Like if you're going through a forest and you encounter a bunch of trees or a bunch of hills or a bunch of rocks, or you have to cross a ravine or you have to cross a muddy tract of land, it's going to slow you down, and those things are random. So regardless of your movement speed, I think the terrain, if it's random, can affect how quickly you move. Hunting is further broken down into stealthing, chasing, and then fighting. Stealthing is basically you're sneaking around and you're either trying to avoid running into an enemy or you're trying to sneak up to an enemy to kill it. Now, depending on what happens, you might have to enter a chase sequence where you're either chasing a creature or a creature chasing you. Then we have fighting, which is basically pretty simple, except I added a new mechanic called rolling. And again, this is another one of those things that I kind of feel should be in the official Dungeons & Dragons rules. There's a big difference between, let's say, a skeleton shooting an arrow and the arrow bounces harmlessly off your shield, and a Tarrasque literally stepping on you, but it fails to do that because you had a shield over your head, right? Like if you're holding a shield over your head and you're being hit by this tremendous, huge force, I don't feel like that's going to really help you. In fact, I think you're just going to get crushed. And so that never really made any sense to me. And so basically what I have done here is I made a rule where if you are being attacked by a huge or gargantuan creature, you can make a dexterity saving throw to roll out of the way of that creature. Of course, you can also make items. During the foraging phase, you can find fossilized bones, you can find obsidian and various items, and then there's a formula here where you can combine these items to create new items. You have the exhaustion level. This is straight from the Dungeons & Dragons Player's Handbook. But I also included the new rules from the 1D&D playtest. This is the first level Thelana, and then this is the 9th level Thelana. Here you can see she's a 5th level range, 4th level rogue. But basically this is the Thelana you would use if you wanted to be more like the story, where she really isn't a badass warrior. She's just a young girl just trying to survive. And here, this is the Thelana that's tougher. She's the character that Thelana eventually grows into. So now here I have rules on playable races. And so you can basically be an Ilmarin character. And so an Ilmarin character is someone who comes from the land of Ilmarinen. They're basically an offshoot of humanity. But of course, the big difference is that the Ilmar don't wear clothes. So you do get racial bonuses for being naked. For example, you have a higher armor class. You have the primitive survival feat. You have a natural explorer feat, similar to what rangers get. You can create henna tattoos, which give you resistances to certain damage types. Things like that. Now, there's a lot about their history. I really hate it when people say, oh, so this is rules for just being a naked character. No, it's a lot more than that. I mean, probably the most standout feature of the Ilmar is that they're naked, but there's a lot more to the race. You can also play as a half-man, a kind of a humanoid gorilla type character. The story takes place in this green square. And so this game is really going to take place here. But I include this whole map of Vania just in case your dungeon master wants to get creative and he wants to basically explain what happens to Thelana when she goes to Macria or Kratos or the Black Coast or any one of these other areas. But this is the main game map you would be using. And these squares are basically what you roll to move. So you start off here in Ilmarinen in Old Man Oak. This is where Thelana comes from. And then you would basically roll a d6 and you'd move a certain number of squares. And the goal is to eventually get to the very end of the map. So when you get to the bottom part of the map, you have left the Wildwood and you basically succeed in that adventure. It's not a very long adventure. You could probably play it in a day. But because there's a lot of random elements to it, you might want to play numerous times. So this is the events table. It's just a random table of things that can happen. So this is where you want to get to. You want to get to these campfires because this is the only place that you can actually rest and heal. Now, this is the Wildwood encounter table. And a lot of these monsters, most of these creatures are animals. And they all come from the D&D monster manual at the back of the monster manual. But you'll notice that a lot of these creatures have little asterisks next to them because these are the creatures that are unique to the world of Vania. And that's the part that's exciting. That's the part I want to get to, which is the Wildwood bestiary. And this basically explains the, aggressive, passive. I also have solitary and herd. Those of you who are old enough to remember, the very first monster manual for first edition had something called number of appearing. And so when you would encounter a certain creature, you could roll to determine how many creatures you find. Because, you're probably only going to see one lich, but you're not going to see just one skeleton or just one goblin. So why they got rid of number of appearing, I don't know why. Maybe they'll bring it back for the next edition. I don't know. So, and I basically break it down into solitary and herd, which means solitary, there's only one of them. Herd, there's a lot of them, okay? And here's all the creatures. I'm going to run through these very quickly, but this is the Arcanelk. This is the blackbird wasp and the chobo. All these creatures, by the way, they all appear in the Feral Girl. So if you've read the Feral Girl, you're going to be familiar with these guys. Also, another thing I really liked in some monster manuals, they have a sizing chart. And this is something that I think they did in 3rd edition with the dragons, just to show you how big dragons are. And this is, Muck Tortoise. It's kind of funny because the Muck Tortoise really, he doesn't do much in the book. But what I notice is that there's no tortoise in the monster manual. And I'm like, well, this is a big part of the story. So I just said, I gotta get a drawing of a tortoise. So we got the Titan. This is basically a Brachiosaurus. A Tyrant. This is basically a version of a T-Rex. Another thing I don't understand about Dungeons & Dragons is why is it that certain large monsters have the swallow whole feature and others don't? Any monster that has a big enough mouth should be able to swallow you whole. Like the Vorgaven, for example, he has the swallow whole feature. This is the Wildwood Gar, which I really like because it's basically a fish that just gets bigger and bigger and bigger indefinitely. It can get big enough to swallow you whole, or it can be really tiny. And here you have like the Woolly Horn. This is a passive beast, so he's not going to attack you, but he's also really, really big. And so if you attack it can defend itself and it can kill you. It can stop you or gore you, But the Ziff, which is basically a zebra-giraffe combination, this is a passive creature which doesn't really have a lot of damaging ability, but you might want to attack it to get meat. so that you can restore your hit points and you can eliminate exhaustion, because exhaustion is a big part of this game. If you don't eat regularly, you suffer exhaustion and eventually you die. And so here's some, notes about ending the game, where you can go after that. You can take your character to different settings, because there's these magic portals that you can leave the world of Anya and you can go to Middle-earth or Ravenloft or wherever. And then here I have some information about my setting. This isn't necessarily a gaming mechanic. This is more just lore to kind of give you a sense of the place. So I have rules about how night and day changes. Like in Anya, it's night whenever there's an eclipse. So there's an eclipse every day because the moon is so much bigger than the sun and it blocks it. This is basically the entire history of Anya. Maybe a dungeon master can read this to get a sense of the lore. And finally, this is my favorite illustration of Thelana. So that's it, guys. This is pretty much a brief little overview of Surviving the Wildwood. It's going to be available on Amazon if you order the Feral Girl on Kindle. It's going to be at the end of the book. But again, if you just want to download the role-playing game, you can just get it from my website as a downloadable PDF. And that website again is www.nickalamonos.com.